Hey everyone, welcome back to all my listeners. Hope you're all having a great day so far. And if it's your first time finding me, thanks so much and welcome. Welcome to episode 8 of my third season. Today is Wednesday, June 23rd, 2021. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. Now, I'm happy. It finally feels like summer to me. My birthday's coming up, and I get to travel a bit to see family and friends. I'm so excited and looking forward to these next few months of warm weather. And I'm so very, very happy to be surrounded by all of my amazing friends and colleagues who make this very serious job so much more fun. I love being able to bounce ideas around and brainstorm with them and try to guide the needle towards a healthier, more value-driven space here on the business side of medicine. Now, I'm finally saying sayonara to those SMRC audits. I mean, there are still another handful or more to discuss, but as promised, this is my 16th and final SMRC audit that I'm diving into today. I'm going to be wrapping up my focused compliance series on SMRCs with facility chronic care management. And I'm simply honored to introduce my first physician, my very first special physician guest, Dr. John Zelem, on this episode. And I round out today's episode with a profound note on journeys from our Nobel Prize-winning American author, John Steinbeck. If you've checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organizations, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve coding accuracy as you help your providers paint the medical picture. If you like what you're hearing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another episode. Please write in a review and drop me a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to my podcast. I really love your support. And as always, a friendly disclaimer. Remember, I'm bringing you the current industry healthcare news, my compliance tips and recommendations based on my over 10 years of experience in front office, back end, coding, and billing for multi-specialty physicians, compliance, and auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. These are my opinions alone and are not to be construed as legal advice. So, let's get into a very special Newsworthy that features my guest today, Streamline Solutions Consulting owner and CEO, Dr. John Zelem. My goodness, I'm so excited to introduce him to all of you. Thanks so much for being here, John.
Thank you. My pleasure. And thank you for inviting me.
Amazing. Now, John is a board-certified general surgeon with more than 25 years of clinical experience. He's transitioned out of clinical practice into healthcare executive leadership. As a previous vice president, he has over 13 years of experience in compliance, utilization management and review, federal regulations, sales, account management, and many other aspects of healthcare. Now, Dr. Zelem has spent the last several years in developing, training, and improving physician advisor programs across the country. He has recently developed a revolutionary new concept utilizing a holistic approach to Utilization Management 360. He is now the president and owner of Streamline Solutions Consulting, Inc., offering services to evaluate and improve many of the above aspects of healthcare. In addition, John is a renowned industry author, and he's published many books and is a well-known motivational speaker and presents often to professional audiences on health and wellness, personal development, and leadership and success. My goodness, Dr. Zelem, what an incredible bio. Thanks so much for being here again.
Again, thank you. My pleasure. It's always nice to share experiences with other people because you never know what kind of an effect it's going to have on somebody else.
Absolutely. And I love it. I love that our paths have definitely crossed. Very happy that I know you. Now, It's evident that your decades of boots on the ground clinical experience and service have helped hundreds, if not thousands, of patients. But I also really leaned in during our many conversations and our collaborations over this past year, and I hear you loud and clear. You have so many other talents that took your expertise to a whole new level. So what's been your biggest inspiration here? What is your why?
Well, I'm a firm believer that where you are, what is in your past, what you've done in life is something that's going to prepare you for a next future step. If I look at what I have done throughout all of those decades, I realize that each one served a purpose for the next step in my life. While I was practicing general surgery, I actually got involved with a company that no longer exists, but learned things about, and helped them with product development, training of sales personnel, traveling around the world to teach these new procedures. And I'm doing this and I enjoyed it, but it was like, so where does this come into play? And in retrospect, it certainly does come into play. That's where I learned how to do training. That's where I learned how to put together, and that's way back when, PowerPoint presentations, which were not very popular back then. And then just the fact of learning how to do surgery, that in itself required a discipline that is very unique. And I did that for, as you mentioned, 26 years. And then I have to admit, I got burnt out. I really did get burnt out. I started bringing patients' stories home with me and just thinking about them. And once you start getting to that stage, you start losing your objectivity, and then you're not any good to the patients. But that occurred during a period of time. So I basically left my practice and I went to Northeast Mississippi, where I took an employed position at a very small hospital. And I have to admit, I wasn't all that busy. I was kind of happy with not being that busy. But on the other hand, that's where I started thinking about writing books, writing articles. I was personally mentored in motivational speaking by somebody by the name of Les Brown. Don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's world renowned. And I learned a whole bunch of things from him. And so then I tried my career as a motivational speaker. That was challenging back then because in so many things, you eat what you kill. And there's so many speakers out there. It was very hard to get enough engagements that would actually support me. And then I started looking at another job. And because they wanted me to take over there and be self-supportive, not employed. And at that point, I said, it's not going to work because I was paying close to $190,000 a year. Now, that's back in 2006, $190,000 a year in malpractice. Wow. So that's what you have to earn before you could even start paying your office staff. And I was supposed to go to a hospital in Pennsylvania. That fell apart. And all of a sudden, I was unemployed for 7 months. And it was quite an experience. There are a couple things that were going on. And, being a spiritual person, they always say it's in God's time, not in your time. Although every once in a while, you'd like to knock on his door and say, hey, what's going on? Are we getting close? But there's several things that needed to occur. And then all of a sudden, the dominoes fell into place. And I ended up working for a company called Executive Health Resources. They're an outsourced physician advisor company. And what I learned from them, because they're eventually taken over by a much bigger company, what I learned during those 13 years just was amazing. Not just being a physician advisor, but learning about compliance, federal regulations, commercial payers, case management, utilization review, physician advisors, not so much CDI. I was more a medical necessity improvement documentation, but still I learned a little bit about CDI. And then that company decided that to eliminate my position as of the beginning of 2020. And I tried looking for other employed positions, and it just wasn't working out. And again, I feel that things happen for a reason. And at that point, I said, let me start my own consulting business with the knowledge that I have. And then, of course, the pandemic came along and put a little monkey wrench into the whole situation. But since that time, I've done a few projects. But since that time, I've also increased my learning. So now I know a whole lot about that I never knew about revenue cycle, but more importantly, about clinical revenue cycle. And as I read and I look and I talk to people, there's so many revenue cycle people that look at that, but they fail to take into account the clinical revenue cycle. And that's what led me to develop that revolutionary concept that you mentioned, Utilization Management 360, which takes a look, it takes a holistic approach at the five major components of clinical revenue cycle, which are utilization review, case management, CDI, physician advisor, and coding. And the interesting thing about all of that is that if you look at it, they're all in silos. But there is a connection for those silos, and it's documentation. They're all looking at the same documentation, but only through their lens. They're not looking at it through the lens of others. So my goal and what I've been working on now is trying to break down those silos. But as I have conversations with my brother, who you know, you can break down those silos, but you have to rebuild them. You can't, if you break them all down, then what you end up is five components in one large silo, and that isn't going to work too. So that's where I've been spending a lot of my time now, learning more and more about that and trying to educate people. Number one, how to break down these silos, but how to rebuild them where they become functionally more cross-educational. And there's a long way to go in that situation. You know, you could see lots of articles that talk about breaking down these silos. But the other analogy that I really like is that of a football team, because when you talk about the holistic approach, basically that says that no one part is more important than the whole. And if you go to my website, which I'll give you the information at the end, but if you go to my website, there's a video there that I had produced where we compare Utilization Management 360 and a holistic approach to the human body. And if you think about the human body is the best example of holism that there really is, because there's no part, no organ that is more important than the whole, which is the human body as it stands. And you know, it's a great video that I had produced for the website. But people say, well, you know, the heart's the most important one, or others will say, well, no, the brain is the most important one. But neither one of them can exist alone. They are not freestanding. They have to work in conjunction with the rest of the body. So I talk about documentation being the cement that holds clinical revenue cycle together. Well, what's the cement that holds the body together? It's the skeleton and the connective tissue. It takes all of these organs and holds them together. So that video just gives a nice visual concept of what Utilization Management 360 is all about. So now, looking at if in some of the people that I've spoken with that are in revenue cycle, the revenue cycle is so complicated. There's so many aspects to it. But in looking at them, the vast majority look at revenue cycle as a whole, but they don't include clinical revenue cycle, which is such a big variable from a financial point of view. So that's somewhat the area that I'm looking at right now and that I'm working on.
I love it, John. Your background, your passion, your pivoting, you know, my audience is going to really be able to take away a lot from what you just discussed about the steps involved in your journey. You know, from your passion of being a general surgeon, which led to your burnout, right? That's a hot topic right now. But you and I both know burned out physicians have existed for a very long time. Yeah. Absolutely.
And it also led to the degenerative spine disease that I've developed.
You're right, but you are recovering and you're doing better.
I am recovering from that, yes.
Thank goodness. But no, you presented us with so many takeaways. I love the fact that your passion led to your pivoting. You stayed in the field and you have so much more to offer, right? You had the wherewithal to understand that it's your documentation, physician's documentation, that is still a little bit lacking. And because you yourself are an MD, you are beyond qualified to help others, to achieve those newer levels, hopefully, and improve the documentation. So the other folks like myself, those coders, can actually abstract things with a better sense of accuracy. So then people like me on the back end don't see these high levels of denials and post-payment audits that we don't like to see, right?
Right.
So I think you have so much to teach all of us, that we're all able to do multiple things in our fields. And we should definitely, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I know you and I have spoken on this for quite some time about breaking down those silos that definitely do still exist within HIM, if you want to call it that, or within the revenue cycle at large, where those folks are in one lane, the coders are in the other lane, the CDI folks are in the other, and that nobody is, if I can use air quotes, is allowed to talk to each other, is allowed to develop better strategies to improve how things are done correctly the first time. So before those claims are pushed out, we need to be able to communicate together to affect change positively. So we don't see these claims come back to haunt us in 2 weeks or 6 months later, or like I said, in that post-payment audit situation.
Well, this is a great time to introduce the white paper that you were involved with, because if you look at how healthcare is right now, as opposed to other industries, let's take a look at one of the favorite principles that I have are the 14 principles that come from Toyota, and principle number 5 is that if any person on the assembly line sees a problem, they have permission to stop the assembly line without repercussions.
Right.
In medicine, let's just say healthcare in general, because I think healthcare is a bigger term, that so much time is spent on correction, not on prevention.
Yes.
Can you imagine the assembly line and having cars coming out at the end where they need to correct all the problems instead of preventing them at the beginning? And, since you were involved with the development of this white paper, I would love to hear some of your thoughts from it, because it takes that concept of prevention versus correction. If you look at healthcare, there's scrubbers. What is that doing? It's correcting problems.
Correct.
Then you have the clearinghouses. They're also looking for problems. And one of the favorite ones that I always talk about, and in today's world, it may not be so far-fetched, but performing a hysterectomy in a male. That gets picked up. But why couldn't this have been prevented? You'll save time, you'll save energy, and you'll save money.
Absolutely. Being a part of that white paper, fantastic experience. Your brother, Jim, was a part of it, Tiffany Ferguson and Jennifer Foskett and yourself. It was incredible because we are all 4 of us are from different areas, right? We have different job titles. We come from different hospital systems, et cetera. But we all have similar and common goals, which is, again, to break down the silos and try and, develop ideas for how to be successful from the very, very beginning. So we created this idea of, creating a team that involved multiple people that don't necessarily exist, right, at all facilities throughout the country. So we really thought that an auditor type of a person would be needed. A type of person from the claims denial end would be very necessary as a component for our team. So, I think it's incredibly valuable as a consideration for process improvements, because, you and I know there are many, many of us out there, so many voices that are all about change. And our end goal is the same thing, is to protect the provider, to protect the facility. Everybody should be focused heavily on compliance. And we just don't see that in today's landscape.
Mm-hmm. No, and it's as I know you said before, that you're going to be looking for someplace to publish this. And when you finally do, I think that it will certainly provide great information to a lot of people out there to kind of look at their processes and look at it from a holistic approach and how to prevent problems instead of correcting them at the end. One of the CEOs that I worked for at one point took a look at a simple little challenge in healthcare. That is, writing an order to have some blood drawn for a certain result to the time that the result appears on the chart. And what he did is he decided to look to see how many different places can something go wrong between the order being written and it being arriving on the chart. And if I remember correctly, it was well over 100 different challenges that can occur during that simple little process. Now, that's one little thing in healthcare. Take that and expand it across the continuum of a hospitalization. If they had that many problems when they sent up the Atlas rocket to take those astronauts to the moon, you can imagine that would have never occurred. And even if they had a 0.001% error rate for that mission, it could have ended up in disaster. And take that and transition it to healthcare. There's so much that we can do. There's been a number of articles in the past about medical mistakes, deaths from medical mistakes. Back in the early 2000s, it came from, I'll think about it as we go along. But they said that there are over 100,000 deaths a year from medical mistakes. Institute of Medicine, that's who did it. As of an article that appeared in 2016 from the Journal of Safety in Healthcare, there's now well over 400,000 deaths a year due to medical mistakes. Now, I'm not saying malpractice, but things that occur in the process. Mm-hmm. That is actually close to 267 747s crashing a year when you look at all those deaths. And if that happened, it's got to change.
It's got to change. That's abominable. Those numbers are abominable.
Now, if you look at Sully Sullenberger, he's the guy who landed the U.S.
that airplane, right?
Yeah, the Hudson. He is very much involved with healthcare safety. And this is an area that I have an interest in. I haven't done much in it, just learned about it. But, the concept behind it is some of the things we can have so much to learn from the airline industry about safety. I know that they came out with, prior to doing a surgery, that there's a checklist that you need to go through. Mm-hmm. Doctors just rebelled against that. But that's what allows you to fly a plane safely from location A to location B. Yeah. And there's a great book out there called Why Hospitals Should Fly that goes into that. But I guess I'm getting off. I'm going down a rabbit hole. But all this stuff is very interesting and alludes to the white paper that you folks have put together for prevention as opposed to correction.
Absolutely. And I think we really need to start celebrating our employees, our people. We have a lot of folks on board, right? In physician practices, in the hospital setting. We have a lot of personalities and types of people who possess not only critical thinking skills, they're also very creative. So we really need to start listening to these voices who perhaps have a lot of wonderful ideas in this idea of a stopgap mentality, right? We need to have these stopgaps in place to help prevent these high volumes of error, which, are just way too profound. And we need to just get better. We need to get better.
And as you bring that up, that leads into one of the areas that I spend a lot of time on is team empowerment. Because what you just described is empowering the team.
Yes.
And if you have a team of workers, people say, well, you need to rebuild it from the top down. The answer is no, you need to rebuild it from the bottom up. Exactly. If you're building a house, you don't start with the roof, you start with the basement.
That's right.
And the other thing too is your team. If you empower your team, they will provide you with success. And the greatest example is sports. I'll take a football team because that's pretty much the most common, but it's the team that wins. Yes, you have a coach, but the goal of a coach, the goal is like a manager. Their role is not to play the game. Their role is to empower the team, find out what the challenges are, the bottlenecks, the constraints, and correct them so that they could work more efficiently. And you do that, and your team will make you look good.
Absolutely.
And when a football team has a losing season, they don't fire the team; they fire the coach.
They fire the coach. Well said.
So what you have described is team empowerment, and that's so important to the solution. Part of the solution of breaking down the silos. It's not just breaking them down, but it's rebuilding them correctly so that they're cross-functional.
That's right. I love it. This is fantastic. Fantastic insights, as always, from Dr. John Zelem. I love talking to you. I love it.
Thank you. Same here. Same here.
Now, I don't know if we've missed anything, and I know it's almost time for us to go. But my last question for you, and if you have any other insights you want to throw in, please do. I want to know, where am I going to see John in the next 5 years?
Not in retirement, that's for sure.
No, of course not. Nope. You will be golfing, but not in retirement.
There's so much good stuff to try and accomplish. Where do I see myself in the next 5 years? I am looking to be able to go and help healthcare components. I don't know if that's the right word, but I don't think it's just hospitals that need help. If you look at revenue cycle people, you see them for small businesses, you see them for physicians' offices, you see them in lab places, X-ray places, etc. There's correction and process challenges that need to be looked at and improved. Hospitals is on a much larger basis, but I like to compare it to building a puzzle. One of my hobbies is building 2,000-piece puzzles. And you look at that and you say, well, boy, is that complicated. But you can simplify it. I look at there are 3 ways to build a 2,000-piece puzzle, or any puzzle. The most common way that people do it is to build the edges first and then fill them in. The second most common is to take all of the pieces and put them all out over a table and start looking for pieces that fit together. It's also very challenging. What I like to do is I like to look at the final picture, because that's the nice thing. It's a 2,000-piece puzzle, or any piece puzzle, is a perfect gap analysis, because you know where you are and you know where you want to be. So if I look at a puzzle, let's say it's a country scene. There's a cabin, there's some trees, there may be some flowers, there may be a bridge, there may be some water. I like to take the piece and build each section. And then afterwards, you may have 3, 4, 5 sections, is find out how to fit them together and then to fill in the pieces in between. And that's the way I see in project management. To talk about UM360 as a whole is overwhelming. And people listen to that and say, well, that's way too big a project. What are we going to do? Well, we could pick one spot and say, let's work on this one first, then see how it interacts with another one. But using the 5 components, let's say we start with CDI and take a look at what CDI is, find ways to correct, and I use that word cautiously, but to improve their processes. And then once you get to CDI, you could start looking at, well, how does CDI interact with utilization review? How does CDI interact with coding? And then pivot from one to the other. And then there are going to be a number of pieces that need to be fit in between to make it whole. It can be long-term, it can be short-term. So it's not just hospitals that need this, it's all sorts of organizations within healthcare. And it's not just healthcare too. This is a process that could be taken into manufacturing, into architecture, whatever topic you could think of. It's the process that needs to be looked at and then look for mechanisms of correction. So I see myself helping all sorts of organizations to provide an insight into where their challenges are and where we can help them improve their processes. That's one. Number two, I am going to be moderating a seminar. I'm going to keep it remote because I think it's easier, all-day seminar in September. That's going to take 5 experts in the healthcare field and bring them all together to give a little bit of a talk. And the title of the seminar is Peeking Under the Hood of Clinical Revenue Cycle, because that's what we need to do. We need to look. You'll see me continue to write articles. I am interacting with other individuals and working with them to help improve revenue cycle. And God, it's such a vast process. There's lots of areas for improvement. And right now, that's pretty much where I see myself in the next 5 years. I'm sure I'll come up with another thought, another area to move into within these 5 years. But those are my plans for right now.
I love it, Dr. Zelem. I love it. You're a visionary. And you want to take UM360 further beyond healthcare. I love it. I cannot wait to see all the amazing that you end up doing in these next 5 years and beyond.
Well, thank you.
Phenomenal. Now, where can my listeners find you other than LinkedIn? Where can my listeners find you?
My website, it's a long, by the way, if you happen to hear thunder in the background, that's not.
It's raining where you are. Okay.
No, it's not. I have an Amazon Alexa. I don't want to say it because it'll stop working, but I love thunder and rain as background.
Oh, the background sound, yes.
Background sound, yes.
It's very soothing to me.
I hear that. That's where it's coming from. It's not raining. It's a beautiful sunny day right now. My website is www. It's a long word. It's 3 words all together. Streamline solutionsconsulting.com. And that's where you can get a lot of information. That's one of the ways to contact me. I do have a newsletter that people can sign up for. My email is john@streamlinesolutionsconsulting.com. And I would welcome anybody if they have questions, even just challenges that they want a little bit of advice on or whatever. Reach out to me. I am sometimes too hyper responsive to emails, and it doesn't always occur, but for me, it's like it's the right thing to do for me.
Excellent, John. I'm going to make sure I put all of this in my show notes so people know exactly the details of where they can find you. And I agree. You are responsive. You're fabulous. I'm so glad that we're connected. You're incredible. And thank you so much for being here today.
Oh,
your insights are amazing.
It's really my pleasure. And it's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you so much.
And now, It's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. Let's dive into my compliance tips here in my final Part 16 of SMRC audits that are blasting in across the country. Remember, these are a part of the 16 new Unified Program Integrity Contractor, the UPIC audits that are being conducted via the Supplemental Medical Review Contractor, the SMRC, at Noridian. Their function is to conduct nationwide medical reviews of Parts A, B, and DME providers and suppliers as directed by CMS. It's the responsibility of the SMRC to review medical records and related documentation to ensure that claims are being processed in accordance with CMS guidelines. Now, I provided you with details for 15 current SMRC audits in prior episodes that involves durable medical equipment, supplies, and non-covered SNFs, spinal cord stimulators, outpatient hyperbaric oxygen therapy, diabetic testing strips, polysomnography, inpatient rehabilitation facility, skilled nursing facilities, specimen validity, therapeutic shoes for diabetics, intravenous immune globulin, botulinum toxins, DRG for thyroid, parathyroid, and thyroglossal procedures, TENS units, transforaminal epidural injections, and the hospice portfolio that are current audits in the SMRC's spotlight. So let's get into my final Part 16 of SMRC audits. Now, the 16th is titled 01-038 Facility Chronic Care Management, or CCM, Notification of Medical Review. Now, Noridian SMRC is conducting post-payment review of claims for Medicare Facility Chronic Care Management. Again, that's our CCM. Services billed on dates of service from January 1st, 2019 through December 31st of 2019. Remember, these are the time parameters. This notification includes the reasons for the review, documentation that will be requested in the additional documentation request letter, the ADR, as well as resources that providers and suppliers may wish to consult with as they're submitting their claims. Now, let's go over some background on the why, right? Why on earth is this 16th SMRC audit happening? So let's get into it. Back in November of 2019, the OIG published a report titled, quote, Medicare made hundreds of thousands of dollars in overpayments for chronic care management services, end quote. Wow, that's a very catchy title, isn't it? Huge. Here, the OIG notes that our CCM services, again, that's chronic care management, our CCM services are a relatively new category of Medicare covered services and have multiple restrictions on when and on how they can be billed. And remember, here's a big tip coming from me. CCM was only being separately paid by Medicare under the physician fee schedule in 2015. And there's a very, very good detailed MLN booklet that specifies what is required for compliance. I recommend it highly, and it should be read. It's about 14 pages long. Okay, so let's get back to the OIG report. Excuse me. Now, detailed in its report, the OIG looked at both physician and facility claims for CCM services. Now, CMS defines CCM as a physician-provided or physician-directed service. Therefore, CMS will pay the outpatient facility for CCM services only when the facility provides these services at the direction of a physician. There is no requirement that CCM services billed by outpatient facility have a corresponding claim by a billed by a physician, However, because CCM is a physician-directed service, it is reasonable, right, to expect that in most cases, a physician would be submitting a claim for the same service. So the OIG reviewed CCM services billed by facilities without a corresponding physician claim and identified approximately $1,100,000 in potential overpayments. So then and therefore, CMS tasked the Noridian SMRC to review a sample of outpatient facility claims to determine if claims were being properly billed. So, of course, the reason for this review is critical. And in response to the OIG report, CMS instructed Noridian SMRC to conduct data analysis and related medical review activities on these chronic care management claims billed out by facilities. They're narrowing it down in scope for us in claim sample details, and Noridian SMRC will complete their data analysis and review activities in accordance with applicable statutory, regulatory, and sub-regulatory guidance. They are honing in on type of bill, or TOB, 13X for outpatient hospital. They are also honing in on 4 CPT codes. The first CPT code is 99487, which generally is defined as complex chronic care for 60 minutes. But now when you expand the definition out further, it's defined as complex chronic care management services with the following required elements: multiple 2 or more chronic conditions expected to last at least 12 months or until the death of the patient. Chronic conditions place the patient at significant risk of death, acute exacerbation and or decompensation, or functional decline. Comprehensive care plan established, implemented, revised, or monitored. Moderate or high complexity medical decision making. First 60 minutes of clinical staff time directed by a physician or other qualified healthcare professional per calendar month. Now, the second CPT code is 99489, which generally is defined as complex chronic care, additional 30 minutes. But now expanded further, this code is defined as complex chronic care management services with the following required elements: multiple 2 or more chronic conditions expected to last at least 12 months or until the death of the patient. Chronic conditions place the patient at significant risk of death, acute exacerbation and or decompensation, or functional decline. Comprehensive care plan established, implemented, revised, or monitored. Moderate or high complexity medical decision making. Each additional 30 minutes of clinical staff time directed by a physician or other qualified healthcare professional per calendar month. And remember, list separately in addition to the code for the primary procedure. Now, the third CPT code is 99490, which generally can be defined as chronic care management service 20 minutes. But now expanded further, this code is defined as chronic care management services with the following required elements: multiple 2 or more chronic conditions expected to last at least 12 months or until the death of the patient. Chronic conditions place the patient at significant risk of death, acute exacerbation and or decompensation, or functional decline. Comprehensive care plan established, implemented, revised, or monitored. First 20 minutes of clinical staff time directed by a physician or other qualified healthcare professional per calendar month. And the fourth and final CPT code under scrutiny is CPT code 99491, which in general can be defined as chronic care management service 30 minutes. But expanded further, this code is defined as chronic care management services provided personally by a physician or other qualified healthcare professional, at least 30 minutes of physician or other qualified healthcare professional time per calendar month with the following required elements: multiple 2 or more chronic conditions expected to last at least 12 months or until the death of the patient. Chronic conditions place the patient at significant risk of death, acute exacerbation and or decompensation, or functional decline. Comprehensive care plan established, implemented, revised, or monitored. Now, of course, we're not done yet, right? There's more. There are documentation requirements as well. I'm going to go over a list of 13 specific, very specific documentation requirements that will be in your ADR letter. These items you will have to furnish, right, to support your claims that have already been paid, and now that you're under post-payment review in this SMRC audit. Now, the first documentation requirement is going to be that medical record documentation to support that the patient had 2 or more chronic conditions and expected to last at least 12 months with significant risk of death, functional decline, exacerbation, or decompensation. The second documentation requirement involves that annual wellness visit, that AWV, or the initial preventive physical exam, the IPPE, or a comprehensive evaluation and management, an E&M, performed prior to billing the CCM services for a beneficiary new to chronic care management, or for beneficiaries not seen by the billing provider within the last 12 months. Now, the third documentation requirement is for that practitioner, nurse, and ancillaries personnel's progress notes. The fourth documentation requirement involves those diagnostic tests, the radiological reports, the lab results, the pathology reports, and other pertinent test results along with their interpretations. The fifth documentation requirement involves that verbal consent or a written consent signed by the beneficiary or caregiver must include these elements, must include the description of the CCM services. There must be an ability to revoke or stop CCM services. It must include the responsibility for cost sharing. There must also be verbal consent obtained for chronic care management documentation to support the narrative discussion and prior permission acceptance. The sixth documentation requirement involves that comprehensive care plan, and it needs to include measurable goals that were established, implemented, revised, or significantly monitored. The seventh documentation requirement involves that comprehensive care plan must have been provided to the beneficiary and/or caregiver. The eighth documentation requirement involves the medical record documentation to support the time, that time that was spent on the chronic care management services according to the CPT level that was billed out on the claim. The ninth documentation requirement involves that medical record documentation to support those dates of service that were billed out again on the claim. The 10th documentation requirement involves those signature logs and/or that signature attestation. Do include those if any of the provider's signatures are missing or illegible. And remember, if you're using an electronic health record, try and include your facility's process of how the electronic signature is created. Include an example of how the electronic signature is displayed and signed and dated by the physician. The 11th documentation requirement involves that advanced beneficiary notice of non-coverage, if that's applicable. The 12th documentation requirement involves any and all other supporting documentation. And the 13th and final documentation requirement is if that medical record documentation is submitted via the electronic submission of medical documentation or the ESMD process. That needs to make sure that the beneficiary is identified, the date of service is identified, and the provider of the service should be identified. And all of these elements should be clearly identified on each and every page of the submitted documentation. Okay, so that's a lot of documentation, once again, that has to be accurately captured and stored within the EHR. And remember, what are considered to be chronic conditions to Medicare? They can include, but are not limited to, Alzheimer's disease and related dementia, and arthritis, osteoarthritis as well as rheumatoid, asthma, atrial fib, autism spectrum disorders, cancer, cardiovascular disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, depression, diabetes, hypertension, and infectious diseases, including HIV/AIDS. So remember, these post-payment audits are a sign, right, They're a huge signal that something may be amiss in your documentation, your coding, and your billing. These 13 requirements are a very good reminder that you should be making checklists and improving workflows and efficiencies at your practice to ensure all documentation is being captured. Coding and billing are compliant for all applicable statutory and regulatory guidelines. So, a better, smarter approach is one that's proactive and starts by painting a clear, rich, and vibrant medical picture the first time, so your certified medical coder can then abstract codes with accuracy. And finally, in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from the American author John Steinbeck. "A journey is a person in itself. No two are alike." 100% accurate, right? I think this is a profound note on journeys, and I completely agree. I'm spotlighting those people in my circle. I'm highlighting them because of their uniqueness, their individuality. Yet we all strive towards the same or similar missions in this space of healthcare. Really building relationships and listening to one another is fundamental to growing in our own journeys. I'm happy John Steinbeck's spark still shines on in all of us today. So that wraps up today's episode. Please go out and make this a great day, an incredible week for yourselves. Aim a little higher, do a little more, and give back in any way you can in 2021. There's so much each one of us can do. As always, I appreciate you diving into today with me. And if you want more information from me, go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. Please continue staying safe and healthy, practice safety for one and all during our collective life in the time of coronavirus. Thank you for listening in on today's very special episode, and I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.